Jane Farnham from Great British Talent, and welcome to our series of podcast videos, basically learning all about our fabulous speakers. It's an opportunity for you to find out how they can help you at your next corporate event. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Chris Heemskerk. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Chris, tell me a little bit about your life prior to speaking.
Yeah, so prior to speaking, let's maybe condense it. Over the last 12 years, I've been at companies such as Apple and Google, of which the last 7 years was with Google in the United States and North America, where I was responsible for our inbound sales programs. Prior to that, I was in Europe, where I was also working at Google for customer acquisitions across Europe. And prior to that, born and raised in the Netherlands, a little town at sea.
I've spent quite a bit of time in the Netherlands. I do love it. It's a beautiful country.
Oh, you have, really?
Yeah. I've worked there quite a few times now, and I just love visiting. Everybody's just so friendly. I love it. So you obviously have a huge background with some big corporates, some corporate giants, I may say, and you've now started the Innovation Alliance. So how does it make innovation strategies accessible globally?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So the Innovation Alliance is a global network of tech executives and innovation leaders, and together we help companies develop innovation capabilities. And how that works is that, as you might be familiar, there's a lot of organizations that have a top-level business strategy, but oftentimes it's the case, in the majority of cases, that they don't have a dedicated innovation strategy. And what we mean by that is, do they have a repeatable and scalable model or process to managing innovation efforts, kind of like an ecosystem in an organization? And so our mission is to help every forward-thinking organization or every serious organization, help them to develop their own innovation engine, if you will.
Okay, so you go in, you help them start almost from scratch, from the bottom up. If they've got no structure in place already, you can help them implement that. But then how do you ensure that that lasts when you've departed?
Yeah, it's a good question, because inherent to many innovation efforts, like you might be familiar, many organizations, they've experimented with, for example, a brainstorm, is that it's ironic because once the actual, let's say in this case, ideation session or brainstorm is over and people return home after an offsite, then, it's not always that things are implemented. Oftentimes things get stuck and people get back into the daily rhythm and to the daily stress of things, which is, of course, quite normal. But yeah, you need to have a system in place that continues even after getting back, let's say, from your offsite. And so there's 10 main ingredients that we've identified that makes high performing innovation cultures work. Within an organization, for example, the first step is to make sure that you have, commitment and sense of urgency from the C-suite and from senior leadership, because oftentimes you would think it's like a bottom-up effort, and sometimes that is the case. But if there's no alignment and dedication and urgency from the top, it gets very hard to provide budgets and resources to keep innovating. Second thing is to do an assessment of the status quo. So, for example, that is describing, what you're currently doing, what's working, what's not working. That can sometimes be an innovation maturity assessment. So what kind of things are in place? As a third step, for example, you would look at, do we have a strong innovation perspective or an innovation thesis? And what I mean by that is, when you look at your organization, there's certain strengths and capabilities that you have. And, after being aware of those, there's all these new things that you can do. So there's emerging customer segments, emerging trends, there's ideas internally. And so as you're familiar, there's maybe 200 or 300 things and options that you can choose from. And so there's a dedicated effort that's required to select what you're doing for the next year or so. And then maybe what will you do between 3 and 5 years, and what will you do maybe 5 years and out. And so you already have, this, I would say, this prioritization of efforts, but also with a time horizon attached to it to make sure that you don't spin up and end up basically, spinning your own wheels. After that, once you have a strong innovation thesis or perspective in place, which means that you know what the hunting grounds are, and you know in what areas of the organization you will hunt for new innovations and run new experiments in those directions, slowly on you start to develop a portfolio. And with that, I mean, it's basically just a list of all the innovation experiments and prototypes that you're launching. You can see how far along they are. You can rate them, how well they're performing. You can classify them with regards to in what innovation horizon are they, which means that is it something that's close to the core? Is it something more adjacent, or is it something truly transformational? And then after that, companies, they have to find a mix of where they will source these innovation efforts. So for example, there's organizations that have an innovation lab. Some of them do mergers and acquisitions really well. Other organizations, for example, they have strong co-creation sessions with customers. And so you hear that every organization has their own mix, and it's dependent on team and geography, but that mix does have to be in place in some formal way that's described and what is required of that mix. Which after that you need an innovation model, and with a framework where you identify how will you build, measure, and learn from your experiments, and make sure that people across the organization have a unified way of talking about these experiments. And so you can compare apples to apples a bit. After that, one key element is also to have, your stakeholders on board, because you see in many organizations that they, develop these new great ideas and they start prototyping, but then they find out in the last hour that maybe marketing thinks it's not a great fit with the brand, or maybe legal says, hey, this is something that we can't really deliver on. For example, if you're in finance, there's a lot of regulation. Another thing, for example, is to have KPIs in place. So, there's ways of measuring innovation efforts, of how many experiments you run. Are customers actually not only voting with their mouth, but also with their wallet, meaning that they're actually, spending money on these new efforts, but also getting teams trained on innovation efforts. And then finally, sometimes you have to introduce tools and systems to manage all these efforts, especially in a larger organization. So it's very hard to manage maybe 1,000 innovation experiments in a spreadsheet. So some organizations have software for that, or a dedicated internal database, or like a microsite where people can ask their manager for permission to support an innovation project. So in short, as you've heard, there's 10 basic ingredients that we see coming back. So.
And then do you offer, obviously you can go in and help businesses with implement this. Do you offer then an ongoing support to them?
Yes, and that support can be in many forms. Oftentimes it's an advisory capacity. Sometimes you involve all the other innovators in the field. And so, for example, on the next engagement with, for example, a US-based client, then there will be design thinking efforts, and then you would partner with other universities, for example, Stanford faculty, to make sure that the teams get trained on design thinking methodology. And so sometimes it's you're working alone as an advisory capacity. Sometimes you plug in key innovators from the field, because you might be familiar, it's a multidisciplinary effort. And so, bits and pieces come together that way.
So what you've been describing, is that the innovation scorecard, or is that something entirely different? Because I know that you do a talk around the scorecard. So what is that, and how can that help organizations unlock new growth and opportunities?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The innovation scorecard is a separate model, and I have it in front of me actually right here.
There it
and
is.
the innovation scorecard, some authors and some writers, they write because they love something. For me, frankly, it was a combination of both love and frustration, because I wanted to have a model where on Monday morning at 9 a.m. I could have a concrete list of steps that I could take, or new elements that I could tackle to identify new opportunities to innovate. And so you start looking at organizations that have all these ingredients in place. The main 10 steps that I shared with you earlier are more on a strategic level, more of kind of like, what can you implement? But the innovation scorecard, it covers innovation culture, internal in the organization, what can you change, inform, set the organization up for success, but also external dimensions, how can you partner with suppliers, stakeholders, and yeah, partners in some cases. And then finally, effectiveness. So how do you measure the efficacy of your innovation efforts? So the scorecard is more of a practical, more of a tactical model where you identify key themes, and then you can benchmark your company of, are we actually doing these efforts right now? And if not, which ones could we potentially prioritize?
So it's almost something that you can see to help you get tangible, take changes within the business, and it's something that you can see very easily.
Yes, that's correct. And this comes from many organizations that, for example, that do a course on innovation, or there's, for example, sometimes there's even keynote speakers that inspire, and which is fantastic. Inspiration is important. But then oftentimes the critique is, well, what do I do on a Monday morning at 9 a.m.? And that's something that we hope to solve for with the innovation scorecard.
Okay, strategies. What strategies do you think are key, or what's the most important strategy in keeping culture of innovation alive in businesses?
It's a good question, and it's been researched for a long time. One of the most notable and most successful, I think, studies was within Google back in 2012. It was Project Aristotle at the time. And the reason why it was called Project Aristotle is because Aristotle, one of his quotes was that he identified that that something as a whole, an ecosystem as a whole, functioning well is, functions better than the sum of its parts. And so in that study, they start to look at teams within Google, which were the teams that were most successful. And across all the axioms and determinants, they found that the main criteria for successful teams and innovative teams, the main criteria was psychological safety. And with psychological safety, we mean, do people have the flexibility and the ability to take risks and to share openly their mistakes, and to have candid, respectful conversations with each other. And so having a high level of psychological safety makes sure that people feel comfortable and that they feel okay to share their ideas, and that they won't be judged too quickly.
Being allowed to be authentic.
Exactly, and that's one of the things. Secondly, as you can imagine, it's great if you can share ideas, but you need the time and space to innovate. And so what I mean by that is, don't just do a brainstorm, but actual prior to the brainstorm, if you're going to do one, confirm with the budget and follow-up timelines when you will execute on the brainstorm, and also make sure that you have a target that at the end of the ideation sprint, so it could be several weeks or months, that there's actually going to be maybe 2 or 3 prototypes, and committing to a budget to develop those prototypes, because oftentimes what happens is business gets busy, and we don't know if we have resources now, and so committing up front creates a strong discipline.
I think it's really important, it's day-to-day life, but also within business and corporations, that, words and actions align. It's all very well to have meetings and plans in place, but if you're not following through and, delivering what you say you're going to deliver to a certain time, it just goes on and on and on, because you're always busy firefighting on the front line with any business. You're always busy, so you have to action things. It's I see it every day where people do a lot of this, and then there's no deliverables at the end of it. So let's just move on to some new leaders. So if you were starting your innovation journey, what would your advice be?
Do you mean as a executive, or as a CEO, or as an individual contributor?
I suppose as somebody who was working in the field of innovation, and they obviously have a small business, but how would you take it to the next level?
Yeah, if somebody is tasked to lead an innovation process or project from the beginning, let's say you're not the CEO or you're not the owner of the company, it might sound strange, but the beginning is about finding strong and secure, let's say, hunting grounds. So knowing in what areas the company wants to invest to test and find new efforts. And what you need for that is you need a strong connection between yourself, your organization, and then the C-suite. And what I mean by that is that you know what their strategic priorities are, and that your innovation efforts are aligned with the corporate strategy. Because oftentimes what happens is that they ask people in the organizations to innovate, and then they come up with all these new ideas, but they might be a little bit random, and they might not be in direction with the strategic direction of the company. And so what happens is a lot of these innovation efforts, they get shut down, unfortunately. And so one of the recommendations is to be a good internal team player, be a good politician from that perspective, make sure that you get the air cover and support for your efforts. And once you have that in place, and you have a strong idea of what the hunting grounds will be, you set up your team, but you also hold people accountable, and you set KPIs for how many ideas and how many prototypes you want to develop over the coming months. But again, as I would like to maybe just stress, is to make sure that you have that relationship with people that set the direction in the company, and that you get commitment for not just this year's funding, but also the year afterwards, to make sure that you have stability in your pipeline.
So it sounds like communication is absolutely imperative throughout the company to be able to innovate.
Yes, absolutely. And frequent reporting and communication is key, because imagine you send somebody off on an innovation mission with a whole team, and you don't hear from them in a year, and then they come back with all these new experiments that are out of touch with what the strategic priorities are, and that can be quite frustrating. And if you would have maybe done monthly updates, you would have heard that, like, hey, fantastic, this is in line, but this is not totally in line with what we're expecting. So that frequent communication, maybe every 2 to 4 weeks, is quite meaningful.
And finally then, Chris, what are the big innovation trends on the horizon, and how can businesses prepare?
Yeah, so there's a trend, and I would say it's a good trend, is to have a chief innovation officer in place in many cases. And what I mean by that is that somebody in the C-suite, and some people that are actually in the company's leadership, that have a well-defined role for innovation to happen. And so what happens then is that a company gets legitimacy, right? You see that actually innovation is important. We have a chief innovation officer for it. The second thing there is that chief innovation officer, they need a budget, right? And they know how to coordinate these efforts across the company. So that's one important one. A more practical and a more tactical one is that you might be familiar with large language models, and let's say ChatGPT, and AI tools out there, and more innovators in the field are starting to use these tools for ideation sessions, which can be quite helpful because it can help you guide the process from A to B to come up with new ideas. However, there's also some limitations to those tools. And one of those limitations is that, let's say, a large language model, or let's say ChatGPT, doesn't exactly know the ins and outs of your organization, its capabilities, what its context is in the market. And secondly, a lot of the innovation work is grounded in customer insight and customer problems and customer jobs that need to be done. And so, a limitation of these tools is that if you don't have that external orientation, then it's going to be very hard to come up with ideas that find a very good fit between the strategic capabilities of a company versus what's actually happening in the market right now, and what customers are thinking about, and what customers find important.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for telling us all about what you talk about. It's been really lovely to chat to you this morning. I would love our clients to kind of find out more, listen to this video. And if you've got any questions at all, then obviously you can contact me, Jane at greatbritishtalent.com. If you think, Chris, can help you and your business with innovation, then do get in touch. You can also call us anytime on 01753 439 289. Chris, thank you so much from me. It's been an absolute pleasure today.
Likewise, Jane. Thanks for the invite. And look forward to seeing you soon again.
Thank you.
Thank you.